Good evening, ALC Small Groups. Pastor Jared here. I'm so happy to be bringing you this teaching as a part of our series called Amazing Faith that can help people move mountains. And tonight we're going to talk about how authentic faith can make you successful. But before we get there, I want to talk about a lovely economic principle called the law of obsoletes. You know this law, even though you don't know this law. And what it is that everything has to break eventually, and then you have to buy a new one. And some might argue, including a person in this room, that the law of obsoletes is one of the most frustrating economic principles that could ever exist. Because things should, as he tries to punch his phone over there right now, because things should last forever. Things should last a long time. My parents fall into this category of being frustrated with the law of obsoletes because used to, in the old days, in the yonder years, or whatever you want to call it, you used to be able to buy something and it would last for a really long time. And anymore, it feels like you buy something and it just doesn't last. Now, I'm going to list a few companies, and we're not sponsored by any of these people unless they so choose to do so after this YouTube video. But what we are going to talk about here real quick are companies that have lifetime warranties. So if you didn't know this, here are a few of these companies. Camelback, they make water bottles and the fancy backpacks that hold water, they have a lifetime warranty. Osprey backpacks, really popular hiking backpack. They will replace those for the entire life of the product. Patagonia, more hiking stuff. Cutco Knife Company, they not only will guarantee them for life, but they will actually sharpen them for you if something were ever to happen to those. Rigid Tools, they will warranty their batteries for the entire life of that tool, of the original purchaser. So if a battery does end up dying, they just send you a brand new one. JanSport backpacks. I didn't know this when I was in school, or I would have been buying more JanSport. Although I'm sure I broke a few and I just never called this in. They have a lifetime warranty. Eddie Bauer, more outdoor gear, it has a lifetime warranty. We want things to last forever. That's what we shoot for. We want to make good investments. We want to make good purchases. We want things to stay in the condition the way that we bought them or the way that they were given to us. But the reality is that will never happen for pretty much anything. There's only one thing that we can really count on, and that is our relationship with God. So we're going to read a few verses that gets into the topic tonight. This is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, and it says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." It's a great definition of faith, but I think our English language fails a little bit in the way that we read this verse, because I've found that a lot of Christians, they find themselves in a position where they almost have faith in faith. And it makes this ethereal concept. And if you have faith in quote unquote faith, all you really have is wishful thinking, hopeful thoughts. What real faith is when you have trust in something, when you have belief in something, and that is in a person, a power, or a system. So when we say faith, or now faith is the assurance, it's now trust in God, belief in God. Confidence in God is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. So authentic faith has a lifetime warranty because it's based on a faithful God who will never fail us. And this is the main passage that we're going to read, and I'm just going to make a few quick observations from this passage, and then I'll let you guys get to your discussion. This is Hebrews chapter 11, verses 8 through 12, and it says this: "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, and even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the sea shore." I love this little passage because of this one little phrase that I find highly amusing. I think when we think of Abraham and Sarah at 190, that 190 years old meant something different at their time. But this little phrase, him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, that paints a picture of what it was really like when Isaac was born. I just find that amusing. There's a little freebie for this teaching. So, how can authentic faith in God make you successful? Here are my observations from this passage. Abraham trusted in God more than what he could attain or acquire by himself. It says that he left the land that he knew and he went to a promised land. What he did is he went from a place of being dependent on himself to being dependent on God. And his faith was a huge part of that. And what that authentic faith enabled him to do was to position himself for God's provision. Simple as that. He stepped out in faith, not knowing what the results were going to be, but that faith in God resulted in God's provision. He realized, as it talks about his sons that were in the tents with him in the lands that he did not know. It was as a foreign land to him at that time. He knew that the covenant that he had made with God was not just for him, it was for his children. And so what he did was he had God's vision. So we have God's provision that God is going to provide, but then that authentic faith gives us access to God's vision for what he's wanting us to do right now. Abraham had sons and a grandson, and he was able to see down a few generations to be able to see that God's covenant was continuing. It was starting to take place. But then it goes even past that to where it went past the immediate generations all the way to you and to me. And so we have God's provision, we have God's vision, and then finally we have God's perspective. And this is that ultimate perspective, eternal, not temporal. When God showed Abraham what the promise would result in, he took him out at night and he had him look up in the sky, and your descendants will be as many as the stars in the sky. That is an eternal perspective. That is a weight that Abraham carried as being the initiator of this covenant with God, that it would continue all way past his own immediate generations that he would ever have a relationship with or know. So what we want to do is we want to take our authentic faith and position ourselves for these three things: God's provision, God's vision, and God's perspective. And this is the final verse I'll leave you guys with. This is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Now, we've been talking about authentic faith a lot, but my favorite saying about faith is that it is spelled R-I-S-K. Risk. It doesn't look clear. You don't know what's going to happen next. But what you have is you have authentic faith, trust in, belief in, confidence in a God who will not fail you. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. I hope you have a good discussion and that your faith grows together as a small group. Have a good night.